long ago, and in a different reality altogether, people would gather for a thing they called Super Bowl parties. And this will sound strange, but they gathered indoors, bold and barefaced, and they served themselves from the same platters of food, and verily they plunged their broccoli and baby carrots into the same bowl of dip. And some actually watched the game and cared about the outcome. And some talked while the game was on and became attentive only during the commercials so as to be able to debate which commercial was best around the office water cooler the next day. And some simply stated, "I'm here for the snacks." It's a saying that's taken on a life of its own. Now people will say, "I'm just here for the snacks," as a humorous way of indicating their indifference or nonchalance. I don't have a significant investment in what's going on. I don't have a horse in the race or a dog in the fight. In fact, if it weren't for the snacks, I wouldn't be here at all. Now, I began in this fashion because it's a way of getting us to the question, what am I here for? Here at church, I mean. Here as a part of the community of faith, here following Jesus. It's the soul-searching question that Lent invites us to ask. Lent, you see, is a time for introspection, for evaluation, for contemplation. It is a time for going deep and for exploring our deepest motivations. Presbyterian pastor and author Frederick Buechner observes that after being baptized, Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness asking himself what it meant to be and perhaps what it would cost to be Jesus. What am I here for? What am I called to? It was a time in which Jesus was tempted inwardly or outwardly by the adversary, invited to cut a few corners on his calling. And Buechner suggests that during Lent, we are invited to ask what it means to be Christians. Before we can understand what it means to live as disciples or followers of Jesus, we have to understand what Jesus himself was about, what the meaning of his messiahship was. And that is what our text for today concerns. In the passage immediately prior to our text from Mark's 8th chapter, Jesus is walking and talking with his disciples, and he asks of them, "Who do people say that I am?" And they respond, "John the Baptist," or others say Elijah, or still others, one of the prophets. But Jesus then asks, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter replies, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Now that might strike us as curious. A Messiah who doesn't want anyone to know that he's the Messiah, God's chosen one. How does that make any sense at all? Well, it has to do, I think, with what people expected the Messiah to be and to do. Among many first-century Jews, the expectation was that the Messiah would deliver the Jews from Roman oppression. That is, he would lead a revolutionary uprising, overthrow the unjust rule of the Romans, and establish a good and just kingdom in their place. To begin spreading the word that Jesus was the Messiah, well, that would only rouse a rabble, stirring up a bunch of followers with no idea of what Jesus was about. Like Peter, they would call Jesus Messiah, but with no idea what that actually means. Whatever Peter means when he says that Jesus is the Messiah, he certainly doesn't expect what Jesus begins to teach the disciples next. Jesus begins to teach them, and for the first time, that he must undergo great suffering rejection by the religious leaders, and even death. He says all of this openly, matter-of-factly, but it is a teaching that is incomprehensible to Peter, and who can blame him? What sort of a Messiah eschews power and honor and glory and instead comes to suffer and die? It makes no sense whatsoever. Peter takes Jesus aside and begins to rebuke him. It's a rebuke that is perhaps born of love. Lord, that must not happen to you. It must never happen in that way. Jesus, you just need a few days off or something. You're talking crazy talk. But it may also be something more than that. What Peter may be saying is, that isn't what I signed on for at all. That isn't what any of us signed on for. A Messiah who was a conquering hero would rise to great glory and power and renown. And so also would his followers. We encounter in the 9th chapter of Luke a passage where Jesus' disciples are arguing among themselves as to who would be the greatest. That is to say, there is some sort of a payoff or a reward bound up in their understanding of discipleship. And that seems to be Peter's understanding as well. In rebuking Jesus, Peter raises questions about Jesus' mission and his self-understanding, precisely the sort of questions that Jesus himself wrestled with during his temptation in the wilderness. And that is why Jesus responds to Peter as he does. Get behind me, Satan. You are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. I'm not here for power. I'm not here for glory. I'm not here for honor or recognition or admiration. Do not tempt me or turn me aside. I am here to usher in a different sort of kingdom altogether. Jesus understands what Peter does not. That you cannot bring about God's kingdom through earthly means. There's a scene in the movie Evita in which a general overthrows the Argentine government and takes control, deposing the previous ruler and hustling him out the door. Then another general overthrows him and takes control, hustling him down the steps and out the door. Then yet another general arises and hustles the next guy out the door. The scene is almost comical, revealing a parade of interchangeable parts. It doesn't matter who's in charge. Each successive ruler thinks that his use of the tools of power will be different. The system is utterly unchanged. A Messiah who employed the tools of power and glory and honor would just be the next guy. The only way to bring about God's kingdom is to completely alter the value system. You can't get there by taking the present system and making a few small repairs. You'll never bake a different cake if you use the same ingredients. So paradoxically, counterintuitively, the way to the kingdom is through sacrifice. If any want to become my followers, Jesus says, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. The kingdom that Jesus is ushering in takes every earthly value and stands it on its head, all of them. God's mercy is not given to the righteous and the deserving, but to the unrighteous and the undeserving. God's strength is not displayed through power, but it's demonstrated through weakness. The riches of God's kingdom are not measured in financial wealth. In fact, wealth is to be dispersed or shared, not stockpiled. God's life is revealed in death. And true discipleship is not defined by what is received, but by what one is willing to give. It's defined by setting aside self-interest and faithfully following Jesus regardless of the outcome. Until we fully grasp what Jesus is about, we cannot fully follow him. And like Peter, just when we think we've grasped it, you're the Messiah, we find that we really haven't fully gotten it at all. And in fact, the kingdom is so utterly counterintuitive and for us countercultural that we only come upon it in layers. That's why one Lent's worth of self-examination and introspection doesn't and cannot get us there. But each Lent, we're invited to contemplate anew. Am I living sacrificially? The self-denial of the cross means that we are called to remove ourselves from the center of our own concerns to follow where Jesus leads, wherever Jesus leads. And where does he lead? Well, if our path does not take us to some uncomfortable places, among the poor, the outcast, the discriminated against, the rejected, the unlovely, if the stands that our discipleship causes us to take do not ever lead us to be questioned or ridiculed, if our message is so timid and so tepid that it does little to inspire or to offend, we find ourselves swimming with the currents of our culture and not against them, well, then we can be assured that we're not following at all. As one small example, think of the ongoing fight for racial justice in our country and how much it has cost so many. If our advocacy for and pursuit of racial justice causes no one to say that we're speaking too loudly or asking too much, if it never causes us to speak truth to power or to march in anger, if it doesn't put us at odds with anyone ever, if it costs us nothing, if it causes us to question nothing, then how faithful is our discipleship? Look at the rejection and ridicule, even death threats, that one man's simple kneeling in silent protest during the national anthem has brought upon him. The status quo doesn't like to be opposed. Jesus knew that when he said to his disciples, "My path will not end with a crown, but a cross." In summary, genuine discipleship doesn't call us to incremental actions or small repairs, nor to a purely individual piety, but to a way of life that profoundly and courageously questions the ways of the world. Our text reminds us in challenging ways that to follow Jesus is to say, I'm here for the struggle. I'm here for the cross. If we aren't led to say that, then I guess we're here for the snacks. Amen.